You were never meant to be found. You were folded once, then twice, pressed flat by trembling hands that couldn't stop shaking, hands that had done something or seen something that no ordinary human being could carry alone anymore. You were a secret before you were anything else, and now, 700 years later, you still are. You are a confession letter, and you live in the deepest, darkest, most protected archive on the face of this earth, a place where popes have hidden the words that could have changed history, where emperors begged for forgiveness, where murderers told the truth for the very first and only time in their lives. The Vatican Apostolic Archive. 85 kilometers of shelves, 12 centuries of secrets, and you, folded, sealed, forgotten, are one of them. This is your life, and it is darker than anything written on your pages. You were born from guilt, not from joy, not from love, not from the ordinary need to communicate. You came into existence because a human being reached a point where silence had become unbearable, and confession had become the only way to breathe again. The hand that wrote you was not steady. You could feel it in the pressure of the quill, heavy strokes where shame pressed down hardest, lighter where words were chosen carefully, where truth was edited before it even reached your surface. You were not the first draft. There were others before you, crumpled, thrown into fire, destroyed before they could become real. But you survived. You were written in 1304. Florence, in a stone room that smelled of candle wax and damp wool. The man who wrote you was a member of the most powerful banking family in the city, a name that controlled the flow of gold across all of Europe, and what he wrote on your surface was a confession that could have dismantled an empire. He had ordered a murder. Not with a weapon, not with his own hands, with a single sentence spoken quietly to the right person in the right corridor at the right moment. A political rival, a man who had discovered where the money truly went, a man whose silence needed to be permanent. And the guilt had eaten through him like acid through silk. So he wrote you. He confessed everything, names, dates, the amount of gold that changed hands, the name of the man who delivered the order, the canal where the body was disposed of. He sealed you with dark red wax, pressed his ring into it, leaving a mark that would identify him to anyone who knew what to look for. And then he gave you to a priest. You traveled for 19 days, wrapped in oilcloth, tucked inside a leather satchel that smelled of horse and rain, carried by a courier who had no idea what he was transporting. He thought you were a routine ecclesiastical document, a land dispute perhaps, or a tithe record. He treated you accordingly, carelessly, stuffing you beneath heavier packages, sitting on the satchel at roadside inns when no chair was available. You passed through Bologna, through the muddy roads of Umbria. You crossed the Tiber on the wooden barge while the boatman sang off-key and a goat tied to the railing watched you with yellow eyes. And then Rome. The Castel Sant'Angelo first, then the Lateran, then finally the place that would become your permanent home, the palace archives of Pope Benedict XI, a man who had assumed the papal throne just months before and was already drowning in the political violence of medieval Italy. A clerk received you, logged you, assigned you a number in a leather-bound registry that no longer exists, and then placed you on a shelf in a room with no windows, lit by a single oil lamp that burned for a few hours each day and then went dark. You had arrived, and you would not leave for 700 years. Most people imagine the Vatican's secret archives as a dramatic place. They picture torch-lit corridors, hooded figures, ancient traps guarding forbidden knowledge. They have seen too many films. The reality you lived was far stranger, and in its own way, far more terrifying. It was silent. Completely, absolutely suffocatingly silent.
You sat in darkness for months at a time, sometimes years. The only sounds were the slow expansion and contraction of the stone walls as seasons changed, the occasional scratch of a rat in the far corner, and rarely the soft footsteps of a clerk who would enter, retrieve a different document from a different shelf, and leave without ever knowing you existed. But silence, you learned, was not emptiness. Around you, pressed close on every side, were other secrets, other letters, other confessions, testimonies, condemnations, pleas. On your left, wrapped in faded blue ribbons, sat the correspondence of a cardinal who had fathered 3 children and spent 40 years pretending otherwise. On your right, sealed in a brass tube, was a document that, if its contents were ever made public, would have rewritten the history of an entire royal dynasty. You were surrounded by the weight of human shame, and it pressed down on you, year after year, in that airless dark. You nearly didn't survive the 15th century. In 1527, the armies of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V sacked Rome in an event history remembers as the Sack of Rome, one of the most catastrophic events of the Renaissance. Soldiers who hadn't been paid in months tore through the city like animals released from a cage. Churches were looted, priests were murdered, gold was stripped from altars that had stood for 1,000 years. They reached the archives. You heard them before you saw them, boots on stone, shouted commands in German and Spanish, the crash of shelves being overturned in adjacent rooms. A soldier entered your chamber with a torch held high, scanning the shelves with the quick, greedy eyes of a man looking for anything valuable. He found nothing that looked like gold. Documents held no value to a mercenary who couldn't read Latin. He pulled several bundles from nearby shelves, leafed through them with dirty hands, found nothing he recognized as currency, and left. The torch smoke lingered in the room for hours after he was gone, leaving a faint gray film on your surface that you still carry today. You survived, but others didn't. Thousands of documents were destroyed that day, burned for warmth, torn for use of tinder, carried off as trophies by men who never knew what they held. Entire centuries of correspondence gone in an afternoon. You remained, scarred, smoke-stained, but intact. The most dangerous moment of your existence came not from violence, but from curiosity. In 1810, Napoleon Bonaparte ordered the entire Vatican archive transferred to Paris. Not destroyed, transferred. All of it, more than 3,000 crates of documents, loaded onto wagons, transported across the Alps in winter. Napoleon wanted history. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted the secrets of popes and emperors in his personal possession because he understood instinctively that controlling the past meant controlling the present. You made that journey, packed in a wooden crate with 40 other documents, jolted across mountain roads, held in a Parisian warehouse while scholars and bureaucrats tried to make sense of what they had. Napoleon commissioned a team to catalog everything, to read everything. A French scholar picked you up in 1812. He read you. For the first time in 500 years, human eyes scanned your surface, traced the words of a dead Florentine banker, reconstructed the outline of a murder that history had completely forgotten. He made a notation in his catalog, a small mark, a brief summary, and then Napoleon fell. In the chaos of 1814, as the empire collapsed, the Vatican negotiated the return of its archives, but the transfer was rushed, underfunded, incomplete. Thousands of documents were deemed too expensive to ship back and were simply sold by weight as scrap paper. You were, by pure chance, among those loaded back onto the wagons heading south. You returned to Rome. You returned to your shelf. You returned to the dark. In 2006, a Vatican archivist named Dano Mara was working through a backlog of uncatalogued medieval documents. He picked you up. He was the third human being to read you, after the banker who wrote you and the French scholar 7 centuries later. He read slowly, carefully, his white-gloved fingers moving beneath each line without touching the surface. When he finished, he sat very still for a long moment. Then he reached for his notepad. The murder you described, the political assassination of 1304 Florence, corresponded to a hold case that scholars had debated for decades. A prominent figure whose death had always been recorded as illness, a death that had always seemed slightly too convenient, slightly too well-timed. You provided the answer. You, a piece of parchment, folded twice, pressed flat by trembling hands 700 years ago, solved a murder that history had buried under centuries of comfortable silence. Father Mara published a paper in an academic historical journal, academic, precise, read by perhaps 300 scholars worldwide. The banker's name was never made public. The Vatican does not release the names of those who confessed, even now.
And so you remain, on your shelf, in your archive, in your dark. The murder solved, but the name protected. The truth known, but contained. The secret no longer secret to scholars, but still secret to the world. This is what you are. Not just paper, not just ink. You are the proof that guilt has a longer memory than power. The truth, pressed flat and sealed in wax and locked in darkness, does not die. It waits. You have waited 700 years. And somewhere in those 85 kilometers of shelves around you, 1,000 other letters are waiting too. Each one a human being who could no longer carry what they knew alone. Each one a moment when the weight of a secret became heavier than the fear of confession. The Vatican's secret archive holds approximately 12 centuries of human history. Most of it has never been read. Most of it never will be. You are one of the lucky ones. Your truth was heard, even if the world will never know whose truth it was.